What's up guys, welcome to another video, the MD Journey. In this video, I'm going to show you my step-by-step method on how I study less than 5 hours every single day, and that includes lecture. So I'm going to take you to my computer screen, I'm going to show you my step-by-step method from start to finish. Hope you enjoy it. If you do, please hit the like down below, definitely subscribe, but let's get started. Alright guys, I'm going to kind of show you step by step how I study less than 5 hours a day. My choice of software to use is Anki. I'm going to kind of go step by step using this example lecture. I'm going to talk about asthma. I'm just going to act like this is a lecture I have tomorrow, basically how I would prepare for it, and then how I would make my flashcards and how I would review them. So we'll do a couple examples. Hopefully you guys get the gist. This all basically will take me less than 5 hours to do. Honestly, it's on average about like three and a half. At the very end, I'll kind of talk about who takes 3.5 versus who takes 5. It pretty much depends on if you go to class versus if you like to stream videos. But let's get started. So I'm going to kind of assume that you skimmed the lectures. In the last video, I talk about how you can actively study in medical school. One of the things I talk about is that if you are reading your syllabus, on the sides you're kind of making notes and important questions about the big topics that like 3 or 4 paragraphs talk about. And so I'm just going to assume that you've skimmed your lecture. Personally, I don't really read the lectures to understand them completely. I'm just kind of trying to see the organization, because when I stream lecture and when I'm looking through these slides, I'm already kind of ready for the presentation that the lecture is about to give. So I'm just going to assume that you've skimmed the lecture and you kind of know what's coming. And if you want more information on that, please check the last video on how to actively study in medical school. I'll go ahead and link that in the description below. But open up your lecture slides. I'm going to assume that you have 3 per day. So this is the first one, and we'll do asthma. And then open up your Anki. If you're not sure what Anki is, it's a tool that's commonly used by medical students. It's a really neat software that's used that uses spaced repetition. And so the idea is that you make flashcards, and it's only going to start testing you over time on the ones that you really struggle with, and the things that you get on your first or second time you don't see as much. So over a span of 4 weeks or 6 weeks, however long your courses are, you're going to be seeing the information that you struggle with more so than the ones that you're really good at. And so this is a great way of combining Anki with your classes. That way you're kind of learning the information you really struggle with. So I actually like to make my flashcards before I go to class. I'll give you another alternative later on how you can make them with or after class, but let's just assume you've skimmed your lecture and now you're ready to make your flashcards. So this is what I do. I like to open them up on this PDF Exchange viewer instead of Adobe, just because it has its own personal screenshot tool right here. And that's nice because I can just click on a whole slide and then copy it over. But you can use like a snipping tool or any screenshot tool that you have that you prefer. So let's go through this. We're going to go through this lecture. It has about 49 slides, which is pretty average for a medical class. And so I'll show you how I quickly make these slides in about less than 10 minutes. So what I like to do is I go through the slides, and I'm not really trying to learn any information, but let's add our first flashcard. So let's open that up a little bit bigger. And so I'm going through the first couple of slides, and I'm just trying to understand what's the big idea that these next few slides are going to talk about. So you can see that this first slide kind of talks about asthma epidemiology. Here's a graph, or here's a table, here's a graph, and then so I understand that these first 3 slides are kind of talking about the epidemiology of asthma. So what I like to do is I'll just go ahead and type asthma epidemiology, if I can spell, which I can't. And then what I do is I basically just go ahead and copy the next 3 slides over to that flashcard. So that flashcard is done. You see that I really didn't try to learn that information. That kind of comes for later. But this is just a way for you to go ahead and organize your Anki cards by major topics, and then you're going to learn it later. So this next one you can see is kind of risk factors for asthma. So you can use a screenshot tool that comes with this PDF viewer just to copy that information, or I just like to copy the whole slide. Um, and so that looks like that's the only slide for risk factors for asthma. So that's going to be a slide of its own. Go ahead and look through the next couple of slides. So this is basically telling me what asthma is, kind of looks like what the pathophysiology is, and there you go. The next couple of slides are going to talk about that. Here's a nice little table on it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about pathophys of asthma as my next flashcard. I'm going to copy this one over, and I'm going to copy that one over, and then just go ahead and copy this figure. You can edit these later. I just like to make these flashcards without really being concerned about how they look, because if something looks off or it's not scaled right, you can always come back and fix it. So third flashcard's already done. This is a case history, so this is something I'll have to listen to the stream to figure out what's going on, so I'm not going to worry about it. You can already see that these next couple of slides are going to be talking about diagnosis. And so I just skimmed through it to see what they show. So let's see. So we'll talk about diagnosis of asthma, and then let's see. We'll copy this slide. I mean, I know it really only has one point, but again, you're not really trying to learn it at this point. Again, that'll come later, and I'll show you how I structure it. Because sometimes these slides that really just have one point, the lecturer may go in detail and add more information. And so if you just add these slides, what you can do is when you go to class, you can just kind of go back and edit these cards and then add in the information that the lecturer talks about. So don't think a card is or a slide is not important. Sometimes you can really play by ear and you understand that this is just like here with no purpose, but if you're not sure, just add it in. You can delete it later. So, okay. So these next couple ones are symptoms, and copy that slide. So there's the symptoms. It looks like these next couple ones, like what's the triggers for asthma? You can phrase your questions in your question section in terms of a question. So what are the triggers for asthma? And then that's a slide. Here's some physical findings. So here's a physical finding, talks about spirometry, gives you this detailed example, looks like a PFT, whether you can see it or not. So you can question whether you want to add that to your slides or not. So we're just going to say physical, again, if I could spell, physical exams of asthma, and I'll make this one slide, and then I'll talk about spirometry test in asthma. So one of the things I like to do before was I would just copy the title and put it in here, but I find it effective actually typing in the big idea because then you can search it later, where as a screenshot you can't. So that's the one downfall. So I would just like at least to type in the title. So I'll add in this this figure just in case the lecturer wants to talk about it in detail and kind of point some really important things. But again, I'm not really trying to learn anything about it. And so this is also spirometry. So let's add that in. Perfect. So it looks like these are going to be talking about some, well, it looks like this slide is by itself. So here's just an example. If you really wanted to go really fast, you could just copy the title in, and then boom, flashcards done. Here's some asthma syndrome. So it looks like it's gonna, the next couple ones are going to be talking about different types of asthma. And so you can just make, just to save time, I'm just going to copy the title, but you can write them in like I talked about. So here's some occupational asthma. That slide is done. Here's a cough variant asthma, and you get the gist, right? So you're just going to go down, find the big ideas. Try not to add more than 2 to 3 slides. I find once you get to like 4, it's really hard for what we're about to do next. But just assume that you slowly go through the lecture and you're basically finding 2 to 3 slides, 2 to 3 figures, and you're making a flashcard. So at the very end, I find that the average I have is about anywhere from 15 to 25, which is not a lot for a lecture because the way we're going to try to memorize them is going to be much faster than your typical way, and you're going to be seeing the whole gist of the information. So let's assume that we made all our flashcards. I have 11 right now, and about, we went about halfway through the lecture. So you can assume that this would be about a 20 flashcard um, deck. And so now let's assume we're going to class. And so what I like to do is I go into Browse, and I'll pull this up. And let's see. So you can organize, obviously, your Ankis by different decks. So if you have like a respiratory class and you have a cell bio class, you can organize it that way. You can also organize, like have little mini decks to where you can have each lecture be their own deck, as that's what I would do. But since right now this is example Anki profile, we only have the cards that we just made. And so then what you can do is that, let's say we're going through lecture and he's talking about cough variant asthma, the lecture is, and he makes some important points that are not in the slide, or he emphasizes something for the test. So you can, add that information in there. If you have a slide that has more than one card, so like our epidemiology one, let's say he makes a comment about this figure right here, something that's strange regarding like the race or the gender of people who have asthma or the prevalence, just make that note, and you can make it between that, right underneath that flashcard. So remember this, and that way when you see it, you'll see flashcard 1, or you'll see slide 1, slide 2 with the extra information you added, and slide 3. And if you notice that he doesn't even talk about any of the flashcards, and you were wondering if they're important and he just briefly touches on it or doesn't even touch on it, you can delete them just here. So that's how I would approach listening to lecture. It's like, you know the structure, you know what's coming next, and you're just paying attention on what they emphasize. If there's anything in the slides that he mentions that is, or if there's anything not in the slides, you can add that below. And so now your whole deck is made, you have 20 cards, you're ready to study. And so now what I like to do is, let's say you're done with class, you're ready to review for the day. So you go to your deck and you click Study Now. And so now you can see this is the first card that we made, so asthma epidemiology. And the way it's going to show it to me, it's just going to show the 3 slides. Here's that example text that we added just for this slide. And so what I like to do is I like to go from big idea to small idea. So usually I write these in the form of a question. I think we wrote like, what are the triggers for asthma? So I would write, explain to me the epidemiology of asthma in this part, and then I would try to talk out the answer before looking at any of these slides, just to see what I can remember from my skim, from making these flashcards, and from going to class or streaming the lecture. And then I would see what I got correct on the slides and then what I missed. When I'm learning, I try to go for the big ideas, so I may try to understand these big bullet points, and we'll come back to these later. I may try to understand the big idea of this figure, and then usually, because you never remember anything on the first try, I'll click Show It to Me again in 1 minute, and then I'll go again to the next slide. And it says risk factors for asthma, so I'll try to list out verbally out loud as many as possible. So most likely people would probably say, oh, smoking is a risk factor, but you may not think that, oh, being a male is going to put you at risk for having asthma. So you remember a few of them, you won't remember all of them, and so you come back to it later. Again, it's really quick, so you're not trying to learn everything at the same time. So Anki is a great tool for spaced repetition, but you can still use spaced repetition in one sitting. So don't stare at a flashcard and try to understand every single thing that's going on with it. You can come back to it later. So here's the next one, pathophysiology. So again, I would try to remember the big ideas. So I should be able to tell you these 3 off the bat because it seems like it's a big idea in defining asthma. I may not be able to tell you the IL-13. That's okay. That comes back later. So let's say I get a few of these, but I still don't know the card. That's fine. So now you can see on cue, the epidemiology one's back. So I now remember these 3 facts, but I didn't really take the time to learn this. So on the second time, I will try to see if I can answer this question, again, without looking at the flashcards. But I will see if I can remember these facts, see if I can remember what these figures were trying to show, and then I will actually try to learn this information. And it's probably likely that I will forget some of this. I didn't probably learn it effectively the first time. And some of these figures I may misquote, like which gender is more likely. I may misquote, I guess this is showing like age in the US. And so that's fine. Again, show it to me again. So I spend like 20 seconds of trying to quickly figure out what I've learned and what I have left to learn. And I'll do my best to get more information and then just keep going. So coming back to the risk factors, so now we know smoking and male gender, right? But we may still not remember the other 12. So now I try to add something else to it. So passive exposure to smoke, urban living, and then like a early viral infection. So keep going. Pathophysiology, I remember IL-13. So just kind of keep adding to it, right? And you just keep going through the deck. And again, we have like 11 to 20 cards, and you can see that it's probably been only 3 to 4 minutes, but we're already getting to 2 or 3 cards at a time. And so you should be able to finish a deck in 30 to 45 minutes. And so that's kind of how I'll review for a class, and I'll keep going through until I feel like I understand anywhere from 90 to 95% of the material on, you know, after going through them several times. So that's a form of spaced repetition even in one sitting. You'll probably see a flashcard anywhere from like 3 to 6 times before you feel comfortable with the material. So the next morning, regarding the same lecture, Anki will probably show me the cards that I really struggle with, and it's going to show them to me the next day. So next morning before I go to class, I'll just review those 3 lectures. If it's a 20 card deck, I may have 5 to 6 cards in each deck for the 3 lectures from the day before that I have to remember, so that's 15 cards. And I can probably do that within 30 minutes because, again, I've seen them. I just struggle with them a little bit, so it should be a quick review. On the weekends, how I'll review is that on Saturday, I'll review the lectures from Friday, because usually Friday evening I'll take off. And so I would review the lectures for Friday, Monday, and Tuesday's class. And then on Sunday, I'd review the classes from Wednesday and Thursday. And I would prep for Monday's morning lecture. So that gives you a structure of how my week looks. And let me quickly break down how this takes me less than 5 hours. So the skimming of the syllabus, I would say, is about no more than 10 to 15 minutes per lecture, because again, I'm not trying to learn the information, I'm just trying to get the big ideas and the structure. Making these flashcards, as you see, doesn't take me any more than 10 minutes, maybe 15, if it's like a 90 slide lecture. But again, I'm not trying to learn the information, I'm just trying to get the big structure, organize it based off a big idea. And then watching the lecture, so I like to stream the lecture instead of go to class. If you go to class, assuming you have 3 lectures per day, that's 3 hours. I like to stream them, and I actually like to speed listen to them. And I talk about that in an article on the blog, so I'll link that below on how I do that. But I usually 2x my lectures, if not more. So if it's a 3-hour lecture, then I'll watch them in an hour and a half. And that'll definitely save me some time. Now when reviewing, again, it takes me 30 to 45 minutes per lecture, and finally a little bit of review the next day. So all of that combined comes up anywhere on average for me from 3.5 to 5 hours. Again, depending on how long the lectures are, how hard the material is, and just kind of how motivated I am to trek through and just kind of push through all the cards. But that's basically how I studied in med school for the first 2 years. If you're interested on how to study for clinical rotations, I have a blog post. I'll link that in the description as well. But hopefully you learned something, even if you don't use all these techniques. I hope that there's some bit of information here that you can add to your study strategies, and hopefully you can save yourself some time. This technique definitely improved my grades, and I was definitely less stressed because I was studying less. But my grades improved, so I'm happy with the results. Hopefully you can kind of add this into your repertoire as well. But that's it. So hopefully you enjoyed that video. Let me know what you think by commenting below. You don't have to use the same technique that I use. Hopefully this gives you a framework and you can take this to other classes in medical school. But if you do find yourself stuck and looking for a new study technique to try, go ahead and give this a try for maybe 1 week and see how your grades and retention improves. Once you give it a shot, come back to the video, comment below, and let me know how it went for you. So that's it for this video. If you enjoy these study techniques, then go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm putting out weekly content just like this. If you want more study techniques, then go ahead and check out the blog at themdjourney.com. Subscribe to our newsletter where I'll send you monthly updates on new blog posts that I post all the time. But thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to like, share, comment below, and hit that subscribe button down below. I'll see you next time, my friends.